So waders to Ranger boats. Now I get to fish in a beautiful Ranger 620. It really has opened up a lot of basically waters to myself, and for myself now, that represents adventure, which is really what drives me in fishing. But when I first started fishing on opener, I can remember the exact spot I went to, and that was actually in my waders. It's a classic scenario in the springtime, especially if you get some rain. There's inflows into a lot of these smaller lakes, and that is like spot number one for walleyes. So I remember in Meeker County, my buddies and I would have a couple little secret culverts on the bigger lakes like Lake Washington, Stella, even Mille. Some of those lakes that really are similar size to the lakes in this area, and if we got a rain, or maybe if we had a full moon that lined up with walleye opener, we were super excited to get out right at the crack of 12:01 and just start casting shallow running crankbaits. And I don't know if I ever caught my limit doing that, but at the time my standards were low enough. If we could catch 2 or 3 walleyes each, or 4 maybe, that was a great way to start off the walleye season. And it was really just one of the simplest, purest forms of walleye fishing. After dark, in your waders with a headlamp, just slow rolling like a floating Rapala. So progressing from there, I went on my first launch boat on Lake Mille. I remember I went with a high school buddy. We went out to Miramar, and Phil was the owner of Miramar at the time. And we went out on this big launch boat, and it was just this wall of rods, and every single one of them had a slip bobber and a leech on it. And I can't even explain how excited I was to get to fish Mille for my first time. We hired the boat at midnight again. We went out and we caught them good. That could have been my first limit ever on walleye opener, but it really kind of opened my eyes to all I have to do is drive 2 hours to Mille, and now my gauge for success just went up exponentially. Like we had 15 people in the boat. We almost had our limit. That's 60 walleyes or whatever. And it really accelerated my will to travel, and really my passion for walleye fishing was some of those first nights on Lake Mille. Since then, Mille really became my opener lake of choice for probably, I think, 15 years or so. And I really started learning a lot about just kind of the big picture of the lake, where the majority of the fish are that time of year, regardless of if the ice just came off or maybe it was a little warmer water. But there's just some historical areas that are just loaded with walleyes on the lakes. Obviously back in the day, the limit was 4, and to go out there and catch 4 nice walleyes up to 18, 20 inches, for everybody involved, it was just, it was really a formality at that point. We would go out, we'd put our time in, sun up to sundown, and we would have our limit of walleyes on opener. There was a couple of outlier years there, which really resembles this year, and I'll never forget it, but we ended up going to Leech Lake for a couple of years once Mille started, having 1 fish or no fish, and we had a lot of fun there. But there was a couple of years where Leech and Mille both had ice on them. I think they were 16 and 17, I believe, or 17 and 18. So we were like, well, let's go up to the Rainy River. We always fish that in the spring, and why don't we go up there? We'll just fish the Rainy River, because I'm assuming that a lot of those walleyes are still in the river because the lake was still full of ice. So those 2 years in a row were by far the most fun I've ever had on walleye opener. What ended up happening was, all the females were still in the river, tons of males, and they ended up, basically flushing down the river right on opener. And we sat spot locked in 4 Mile Bay, and Saturday of walleye opener, we had 14 walleyes over 28 inches. And it was kind of funny, we didn't have an actual limit of walleyes that day because they were all females. So had all those huge ones, they're all 25 to 31 inches, and I think we only ended up with 8 walleyes to keep out of the 4 of us. And I mean, that was the simplest thing ever, basically.
Terrible day.
Yeah, right. First world problems for sure. So that was a day where we literally just moved around. We finally settled into an area just off the main channel in 4 Mile Bay, anchored because the water was dirty, and just vertical jigged. A little paddle tail tipped with a shiner, and when those waves came through, I mean, there was 50, 100 boats around us, you would literally see at least 2 people hooked up in every boat simultaneously. So definitely my best opener ever. Keep that in mind for this year if you run into that same problem. So then after that, I really kind of migrated to Leech Lake because I enjoy the tradition of, you know, having that benchmark of success, catching your limit of nice eater-sized walleyes an opener. Like that's my longest memory of walleye fishing. I love eating them, and there's nothing wrong with keeping your limit of walleyes where it's legal. So that's where I really, the last 5 years or so, I focused on Leech Lake because that lake is full of walleyes. It's always easy to get a limit there, and it's really kind of the ambiance and the whole community around opener. It's really just a fun time of year, and obviously a really beautiful lake to fish.